Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to be getting into the programming language of Python. So Python is a high-level programming language that came about around 1990s. And the main uses currently today would be web development, data science, AI, automation. So mainly Python today is really used with a lot of data processing, data analysis, and things of that nature. So the reason we are going to be covering Python is because it is the easiest programming language to read, meaning it's the easiest one to understand when you look at it because it looks very much close to English and you can kind of figure out what it's saying when you write it. So it does have a very popular usage. So there are a lot of communities and a lot of libraries that you can use to help you write programming in Python. And Python also works around all of your operating systems, so that makes it even more easier to use compared to others. So when I say that Python looks like English, this is an example of some Python code. And if you sit there and read it, you see it says if temperature is um, greater than 80, then you would print it's hot outside. So that's literally what it's saying. So basically, you would have some sort of value that's stored in your program that's called temperature. So temperature is a variable in this case, and you would have a variable that says temperature, and then maybe, for example, the temperature is 99. So if you say temperature equals 99, and then you run this line of code which says if temperature, which we just said would be 99, is greater than 80, then it's basically going to print out to the user that it's hot outside. So you see here, it's easy to understand what's going on, and that is a simple example of how you would write it. So the important things to note here are that compared to your other programming languages that have semicolons and curly braces, this programming language does not. So the other programming languages have a stricter syntax or ruling about how you are structuring your programming or your program code, and in this case it does not. So this makes it a lot user friendly. And the only thing that it really uses is indents, which is like, the tab button on your computer, or colons to pretty much break up the code. So Python is used at a lot of companies, but some big companies that you would know, it would be like NASA, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, and pretty much I would like to believe all companies use Python in some way now. So how does it work? Your Python is an interpreted language. So that would be the one that is interpreted basically line by line. So your code would run line by line within a Python interpreter. And where can you write Python? So you can write it in VS Code or Visual Studio Code, Sublime, or you can use online platforms like Google Colab, Replit, or Jupyter Notebooks. So just to start getting coding in Python, there are two options you can do, which are basically the options I just stated on the last slide. But option one would be if you're trying to get deeper into Python programming, then I would suggest installing your IDE. So whether that's PyCharm or Visual Studio Code, which you can use with different programming languages, or if you don't want to install any software, you can use a online Python IDE like the ones listed here. So to create a Python file, you would just go to your IDE of choice. And when you go in, you would name a file. But for it to be established as a Python file, it needs to end in .py, so .py. So examples of that would be simply whatever your file name is, .py, or let's say game1.py. And then that would then store it on your computer and it would know that it is a Python file. So now that we know where to write it, how to start a file, let's get into some basics. So the first thing we want to cover are comments. Your comments, basically what you need to know is that it's like taking notes. Anything you write in a comment is ignored when your code is run. So it's like if you want to write line by line what's happening on each line of code, then that is what a comment is for. So you have a single line comment, which uses a hashtag, or you have a multi-line comment, which uses a triple quote. So if you look in the screenshot in the picture, you see the hashtag comment and you see the triple line quote at the very bottom of the picture. So these are two ways you can take notes within your program to pretty much tell you this is what's going on, or this is what is going to happen in the following section, for example. So a very important component about Python is print. So print is used to print out any values to you, to the user, using a print function. And the print function has to use these parentheses that you see, both the open and the close. But you can use this to print out any text, numbers, results of any programming actions or programming lines of programming that happen above, or even variables. So if you look in the picture, there are different ways of printing, and you see the comment next to it is pretty much telling you exactly what's going on. So here it's saying print hello world, so it would print out hello world to the user. Print 42 would literally print out just 42. Print 3 and 5 would pretty much print like a calculator, so it would print out the response to 3 plus 5. Name is actually a variable. So it's saying the variable is called name and it's holding Alex. So when you would print out hello plus name, that would pretty much print out hello Alex. So this is examples of print statements, and I will have a video that will show you how to create these after this one. All right, getting into your variables and your data types. So I just briefly mentioned a variable on the last page, but it's basically just a name or a label for a stored value that you want to use in your program. So in our screenshot here, we have all of these different variables, but each of them have different data types. So if you look above, we have data types and we have the different types. So a string is considered text, and that example would be high. Integer are going to be your whole numbers, so 42. Your float is going to be any numbers that use a decimal. So an example of that will be 3.14 or pi. And then Boolean literally means true or false. So an example of a Boolean value would be true or false. So in the screenshot, you see an example of each one of those. And all of these are stored as variables with different names. But please take note with the variables that they all start with letters and none of them start with numbers. So you cannot have a variable that starts with a number. It has to start with the letter. You can use a number in the variable name, but it just cannot be the very first character. Also, you cannot use spaces in a variable name. So if you do want to use a space, what people do is they use the underscore as their space to add some sort of gapping, just like the last variable is student at the screenshot. So you can use your variables within print statements. So after you create a variable, many times you may want to print it or see it somewhere else, and you can just do that by simply calling whatever that variable name is within a print statement. So how would you use that? So you can use the plus sign to join strings together or join variables and strings together, or you can use commas to separate items in the print statement. So if you look in the picture, we have a variable with the name of name, and we have a variable with the name of age. and name is holding Alex, and age is holding 25. And it's pretty much saying that we want to print out the name, which would be Alex, and we want to print out age with the colon and then what the age is. So it'll print out age 25, and you can see all of this in the comments next to it. And then the last line is saying print hello name with the exclamation mark, so it would say hello Alex. So the good part about it is your variables you can reuse. So if you wanted to reuse Alex over and over again, then you can do so as long as it is stored in a variable. And that is how variables come in handy. You can also have as many variables as you want in a program, and you can have as many print statements as you want in a program. You can also get user input. So that would be using the input function, and you could say, hey, I want to, enter this information in for the user. I want to pass this information into my program, etc. So if you look at the screenshot we have here of some code, you see it says name equals input. And inside of the parentheses, it's basically saying, what is your name? So when you would run this code, the code would basically say to the user, what is your name? And then the user is expected to type in their response and click enter. And once they do that, it pretty much is saying that they want to print whatever the user said their name was and hello. And the same is happening with the age. So you can ask a user to enter some information into your program, and then you can use that program however you see fit once it's entered. But there is an important thing to note. When you use the input function, all responses that are collected into the input function are going to be stored as a string. So it will be stored as text. So if you have a number that is stored, or you ask the user to enter their age, by default, it's going to be considered a string, as if it was in a sentence, for example. So it will not be a number value. So you'd have to convert that data type for it to be used, and we'll get into that now. So if you wanted to convert your input from the input function to a number, because it's a string by default, then you would either use the int function or the float function. So if you take a look at the example screenshot we have, the very first section of age in print, you see that there's an error because you can't add a number to a string, because that's basically saying, for example, if the user entered their age as 18, what the print statement is saying is print 18, which will be considered text. So it would be a string. So you're saying add a sentence plus 1. You can't add a sentence plus 1. That would cause an error. So you would have to convert your age to a number. So if you look at the second portion of the screenshot, you see in that example it says age equals int, and inside of the int function, and then has the input function, and then asks a user to enter their name. So when you place the input function into the int function, it will automatically convert whatever the user enters into a number, and then that way it can be used as a number in your program. The same thing would happen with the float, except you would just replace int with float. So again, when you have your input, here you would do basic math. So if you change your input that a user enters and you want to do some sort of calculation with it, you have these different operators. And these operators are pretty much the same as your normal math that you do in math. So adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. You also can do floor division. You can also find the remainder of something, or you can even use the exponents. So 2 to the power of 3, for example. So in the screenshot, you see there are various examples, and in the comments, that is just showing you basically what the value would come out to if you were to do it in Python. So basically, you can use Python as a calculator. So now we're going to cover the Python strings, which we briefly covered in the examples, but we'll get into it a little bit further. So when I was referring to a string, I basically meant a sequence of characters. And when I say characters, I basically mean every character on your keyboard. So that will be symbols, exclamation marks, @ signs, that will be your numbers, that will be letters. Anything that you write that is enclosed within quotes is considered a string. So a sentence is considered a string. Your name is considered a string. A word is considered a string. A letter is considered a character, but it can be considered a string as well if it's just by itself. So strings are used to represent text in Python, and you use those or create them by using single or double quotes, as you see in the example. So in the example we have here, you see that we have double quotes and it says this is a string, and then we have another example that says I am a programmer. Both of these use double quotes, and these are then considered strings within your program. So when you want to work with your strings, you can combine them, you can measure them, and you can modify them using built-in operations or built-in functions. So, for example, here we have concatenation, which is joining strings together. And what I want you to notice for the string operators is that whatever value or character you see inside of the parentheses is what you would do for that operation. So you could do one string plus another string. That would put them together. You could do this string times 2, and that would basically duplicate that string times 2. The length is a function, the len function, and that would count your characters in a string. If you want to access specific characters out of a string, example, get specific letters at a certain position, you can do that. And you can even take chunks of a string and print those out or use them in different ways. So right now it may seem a little confusing about what that is, but in another video I will show you how that works in case you are curious. So here are examples of those quickly, how they would be done. As you see here, concatenation, it uses the plus sign. Your repetition uses the asterisk, which would print high times 3. Print len of name would basically print the length of the name variable, which is Alex, so that would be 4. Printing name of 0 is going to print the first letter. And in Python, your indexes for your strings start at 0. So when you count, it technically would start at 0. And if you do print name 1 through 3, it's going to print out LE. So that might be a little confusing. Again, we will get into that a little deeper in other videos, but just wanted to introduce you to the concept because this is some foundational things that happen in Python. So again, you have some built-in string methods that you can use. So they're basically created for you already in Python, and all you have to do is call them using what we call the dot notation. And dot notation literally means dot, call the name. So dot upper, dot lower, dot title, dot strip, dot replace, and dot find. They're all common methods you can use on a string, and they basically do some sort of action on your string. So you see here, upper is used to make it uppercase, lower is used to make it lowercase. Title will capitalize each word that's in the string. strip would remove any spaces that you may have, and so on and so forth. So these methods exist for you already. You don't have to necessarily do these manually. So you can simply call these methods to use on your strings. And again, you'll see an example of that in another video. So here's just a brief way it would look if you were to use it. And in the comments, you would see exactly how it looks if you were to do it. So feel free to pause and kind of read through and see what's happening. But the comment is showing you the output that would happen. And on the left is showing you how you would make that happen. So overall today, we basically covered what Python is, who uses it, how is it useful, and we covered some basics. So looking at your numbers and your strings. So when you start any Python program, these are the two areas that you generally would start in. And again, it can be a little confusing just by, hearing me talk about it and not seeing it happen in action. So the next video will show you briefly how to get started, where to go to start coding in Python, and how to do some of these basic things we covered. So I'll see you in the next video when we get into Python.